You ever wonder why, say, a 10% discount on a new car feels like this massive, gotta-have-it deal, but 10% off table salt, you probably wouldn't even notice? Well, it all boils down to this super fundamental concept in economics, almost like its own law of gravity. We're talking about the elasticity of demand. So yeah, let's get right into it.
Here's what we've got on tap. We're going to start by looking beyond the basic law of demand. Then we'll nail down what elasticity actually is. After that, we'll cover the three main types, do a real deep dive into the spectrum of price elasticity, and then, wrap it all up with why any of this actually matters in the real world.
All right, section 1. So let's start with something most of us probably learned in Econ 101, the law of demand. It's super simple, really intuitive, but as we're about to see, it's missing a really crucial piece of the puzzle.
The law of demand just tells us that if the price of something goes down, we're going to want more of it. An inverse relationship, right? Easy enough. But, and this is a huge but, it doesn't tell us the extent of that change. I mean, does our demand for it just completely skyrocket, or does it just kind of nudge up a little bit? That question, that how much, is exactly what elasticity is here to answer. And that brings us right to the core idea. The best way to think about it is to picture demand as a rubber band. So how much does that rubber band stretch when you pull on it with something like a price change? That is elasticity.
So the formal definition is that it's a measure of responsiveness. It basically puts a number on how sensitive our buying habits are. When a price soars, some other factor changes, elasticity quantifies our reaction.
And the person we really have to thank for this whole concept is the economist Professor Alfred Marshall. He just framed it so perfectly. When a price falls, does the amount we demand rise by much or little? That's the whole ballgame right there. That's what we're measuring.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. This whole idea of stretchiness isn't just about price. Nope, there are actually three main ways that economists measure the elasticity of demand. So we've got income elasticity, cross elasticity, and the one we'll be spending the most time on, price elasticity. But before we get to the main event, let's just quickly get our heads around the first two.
Okay, income elasticity. This is all about what happens to your demand for something when your income changes. You get a raise or maybe your hours get cut, but the price of the actual good stays exactly the same.
This table lays it out beautifully. So if your income goes up for what we call a normal good, think like a nice vacation, your demand for it also goes up. Makes perfect sense. But for an inferior good, say instant noodles, getting a raise might actually mean you buy less of it because now you can afford something better. And then, of course, you've got necessary goods where your demand pretty much stays the same no matter what. All right, next up, cross-elasticity. This one measures how the demand for, let's say, product A is affected when the price of product B suddenly changes. It's all about how different products relate to each other. So, look at this. If the price of coffee goes up, what happens? Well, the demand for its substitute, tea, is probably going to rise. That's a positive relationship. But if the price of tea goes up, demand for its complement, sugar, might actually fall. That's a negative relationship. And obviously, the price of books has pretty much zero effect on how much tea you're drinking.
Okay, and now, the main event, price elasticity. This is the big one, and it's not just one thing. It exists on a whole spectrum. There are 5 distinct categories, and they range from infinitely stretchy all the way to completely rigid.
So, at one extreme end of the spectrum, we have what's called perfectly elastic demand. Just imagine if a product's price went up by a single penny, and boom, demand instantly dropped to zero. Now, this is a purely theoretical idea, but it's a super important endpoint for us to understand the spectrum.
When you look at it on a graph, it's just a perfectly flat horizontal line. What it's showing is that at one very specific price, demand is basically infinite. But if you go even a tiny bit higher, it vanishes completely. Now let's jump to the complete opposite end, perfectly inelastic demand. In this case, it doesn't matter how much the price changes, up or down, the quantity that people demand stays exactly the same. A great example is a life-saving drug. People will pay whatever they have to. Or even something like salt. It's so cheap that a price change just isn't going to affect how much of it you buy. In the graph for this one, it's a perfectly vertical line. It just means the price can go way up or way down, but that quantity demanded, it is stubbornly fixed. It's not moving. Okay, smack dab in the middle of our spectrum, we have this perfect balance point. It's called unitary elastic demand. What it means is if the price drops by, say, 10%, the quantity demanded rises by, you guessed it, exactly 10%. It's a perfect one-to-one response. This creates this very specific kind of curve called a rectangular hyperbola. What that really means is that any change in price is perfectly canceled out by the change in demand. So the total amount of money people spend on that good just stays constant. All right, now we're moving into the more common scenarios you see in the real world. First up is relatively elastic demand. This is when demand is super responsive. A little percentage drop in price leads to a much larger percentage increase in how much people want to buy. This is really typical for things we don't absolutely need, like luxury cars or designer clothes.
And the key thing to see here is that the demand curve is a lot flatter. Just notice how that small drop in price leads to a really big jump in the quantity demanded. It's just very, very responsive.
And our final type is relatively inelastic demand. This is for all the goods where demand is not very responsive to price changes. So even a big percentage drop in price causes only a tiny little percentage increase in demand. Think about necessities, things like gasoline or milk. You need them, so a price change isn't going to drastically change how much you buy.
And what this looks like is a much steeper curve. See here? A really big drop in price only gets you a small increase in demand. It's pretty much the visual opposite of that elastic curve we just looked at.
And here we go. This slide brings it all together beautifully. Think of this table as your perfect cheat sheet. It just lays out the entire spectrum for you, from infinitely responsive all the way down to not responsive at all, along with those key values and examples for every single category we just talked about.
So at this point, you might be thinking, okay, this is some cool theory, but why should I actually care? Well, it turns out that understanding elasticity is absolutely crucial for making all kinds of real-world decisions. I mean, businesses pretty much live and die by this stuff. If they know their product has elastic demand, they know that a small price cut could lead to a huge boost in revenue. Governments use it to figure out how much money they'll make from taxes. Taxing an inelastic good like cigarettes is going to raise way more money than taxing an elastic one. And for you, personally, it explains your own behavior as a consumer.
Have you ever noticed how some price changes feel like a huge deal, while others you barely even blink at? Well, there's a powerful economic concept secretly pulling the strings behind our daily decisions. And today, we're going to pull back that curtain. All right, let's kick this off with a little puzzle. Seriously, think about this. A flight to that place you've been dreaming of is suddenly 50% off. You're probably scrambling for your credit card, right? But what if salt was 50% off? Would you even notice? Why do we have such wildly different reactions to the exact same percentage discount? The answer to this puzzle, it turns out, isn't just some random thing about human psychology. Nope, it's explained by one of the most fundamental ideas in all of economics. And that big idea is called price elasticity of demand. I know, it sounds a little academic, but all it's really asking is, if the price of something changes, how much does our desire to buy it change? Is our demand for it stretchy and flexible like a rubber band, or is it rigid and unmoving like a rock? Now, what's really cool is that elasticity isn't just a simple yes or no thing. It's a whole spectrum. On one end, you've got perfectly inelastic demand. Think of this like a brick wall. No matter how much the price goes up or down, demand doesn't budge. Then, way over on the other end, you have perfectly elastic, which is like a feather in a hurricane. The teeniest, tiniest change in price causes a massive reaction. And of course, right in the middle, you have all these other flavors that describe pretty much everything we buy. So knowing these categories is one thing, but how do we actually figure out where a product fits on this spectrum? How do we put a number on it? Well, economists actually have a toolkit for that, and we're about to open it up. Inside this kit, there are 3 main tools. We're going to look at the percentage method, the total expenditure method, and then we'll touch on the geometric method. Each one gives us a slightly different way to look at the same exact problem. So let's start with the most common tool in the box. The one developed by the brilliant economist, Professor Marshall. Marshall's logic here was just beautiful in its simplicity. To figure out the elasticity, you just take the percentage change and how much people want to buy something, and you divide it by the percentage change in the price. That's it. It's just a straight-up ratio of reaction. Okay, let's make this real with an actual example. That formula might look a little intimidating, but trust me, it's pretty straightforward. We're just looking at the change in quantity over the original quantity, and then multiplying that by the original price over the change in price. So let's plug in our numbers. The change in quantity is 1 over the original 10, and we multiply that by the original price of 20 over the price change of 5. You run those numbers, and boom, you get your answer, 0.4. This is it. This is our elasticity of demand, a single, powerful little number. So what on earth does 0.4 even mean? Well, the key here, the most important part, is that this number is less than 1. And that tells us that the demand is relatively inelastic. It means a pretty big change in price only caused a tiny little change in how much people actually bought. Our demand didn't stretch very much at all. All right, on to our second tool. And this one is clever. It's really clever because it doesn't just look at price or quantity. It looks at our total spending. The logic here is actually super intuitive. Think about it. If the price of something goes up, but you end up spending less money on it overall, what does that mean? It means you must have cut back a lot. Your demand is elastic. But if the price goes up and you end up spending more money on it, well, you didn't really cut back much at all, did you? Your demand is inelastic. And if your total spending stays exactly the same, that's what we call unitary elasticity. It's all about whether price and your total spending move together or in opposite directions. And this table right here shows that logic in action. Let's look at the numbers. In example A, you see the price doubles from 10 to 20. But look what happens to the total spending. It actually goes up from 60 to 100. See? Price and spending are moving in the same direction. That's our signal that demand is relatively inelastic. Now, jump down to example C. The price goes up from 50 to 60, but our total spending drops from 100 to 60. They moved in opposite directions. That's a screaming signal that demand here is elastic. People cut back so much that their total bill actually went down. It's pretty cool, right? Our last tool is a bit more of a specialist's tool. The geometric method is what you use when you want to measure elasticity not over a price change, but at one single specific point on a demand curve. Now, we're not going to get lost in the formula for this one, but the main thing to take away from this graph is that a product's elasticity isn't always the same number. It can change. Think about it. When a product is really, really expensive, any price change is a big deal, so your demand is going to be super elastic. But when that same product is already dirt cheap, that same percentage change is barely noticeable, so your demand becomes inelastic. This method just shows us how that responsiveness changes all along the curve. So we have these concepts, we have these tools, but let's be honest, who cares? Why does measuring any of this stuff actually matter in the real world? Well, it turns out it matters a whole lot. Let's go back to some real-world examples. Things like cosmetics or a new air conditioner, those are pretty elastic. If the price goes down, we're way more likely to buy. If it goes up, we might wait or find a cheaper one. But for stuff like essential medicine or a school uniform you have to buy, demand is relatively inelastic. Even if the price goes up, you still gotta buy it. Your demand just doesn't stretch. You see, understanding elasticity is like learning a secret language. It's how businesses decide whether a big sale is a good idea or if they should raise their prices. It's exactly why governments slap heavy taxes on things with inelastic demand, like gasoline. They know we'll keep buying it anyway. And maybe the most important thing is that it shows you the hidden logic behind your own choices as a consumer.
All right, today we're jumping into one of the most powerful ideas in all of economics. And what's cool is, it's actually pretty simple. This one concept explains so much, from why you pay what you do for coffee to the taxes on gas. It's called elasticity, and trust me, it's going to change how you look at every single purchase you make.
I mean, think about it, right? Why is it that a tiny price hike on your coffee makes you think about switching cafes, but a huge price jump on life-saving medicine doesn't change a thing? You'd still pay it. It's kind of weird, isn't it? What is actually going on there?
Well, there's a name for this, of course. It's called elasticity of demand. Now that sounds super technical, I know, but it's really just a fancy way of asking a simple question. How much do we freak out when a price changes? It's just a measure of our sensitivity.
Okay, the absolute best way to get this is with a simple metaphor. Think of some products as having elastic demand. They're like a rubber band, right? A little pull, a small change in price, and our behavior stretches a lot. But then you've got other goods with inelastic demand, and these are like a steel rod. You can yank on that price, make it way higher, and our demand, it just barely budges.
So that's the what. But for me, the really fascinating part is the why. What actually makes the demand for something stretchy like a rubber band or stiff like a steel rod? What's behind all this? It really boils down to three big things. It's about the product itself, it's about your behavior, and it's about the context of the whole situation. Let's break down how each one of these pulls the strings.
Okay, first up, let's look at the product itself. Because, not all goods are created equal in our minds. This one is pretty intuitive. It really comes down to necessities versus luxuries. For the stuff we absolutely need, basic food, medicine, salt, we kind of have to buy them, even if the price goes up. So that demand is inelastic. But for luxuries, a fancy new car, that expensive perfume, if the price jumps, it's super easy to just put it off or say, you know what, never mind. That demand is elastic. It stretches.
Another massive factor here is whether or not you have other options. Think about something like salt. There's not really a good substitute for it, right? So its demand is super inelastic. But what if the price of your favorite juice brand just skyrockets? Well, you've got dozens of other juices, sodas, whatever to choose from. That power, the power to switch, is what makes your demand elastic.
But it's not just about the product. A huge part of this is about us, our own psychology, and the situation we find ourselves in. And this is where things get really, really interesting.
And when you actually dive into the research, you can see just how much our own psychology is driving these decisions. You see these key factors popping up over and over again. Things like our habits, how urgent we need something, and even just how much time we have to make a choice.
Yeah, this is where our own minds can kind of work against us. If something is a habit or worse, an addiction, demand becomes highly inelastic. Price almost doesn't matter. Same thing with urgency. If you need medicine right now, the price is a secondary thought. And time is a fascinating one. In the short run, you might have no choice but to pay those higher gas prices to get to work. But give yourself a year, you could buy a more fuel-efficient car, move closer to your job. Your demand almost always gets more elastic the more time you have. So you can see a really clear pattern emerging here, right? Things we need, things that are habits, and decisions we're forced to make in the short term, all of that stuff pushes our demand towards being inelastic like that steel rod. But when we're dealing with luxuries or when we have the gift of time to plan ahead, our demand becomes elastic. It's a direct line between our circumstances and our power as a consumer.
Okay. So that's all the theory. The rubber bands, the steel rods, I get it. But let's get to the real question here. Why does this actually matter in the real world? Why should you or I care about any of this outside of an econ class?
Well, hey, don't just take it from me. The legendary economist John Maynard Keynes, he called this concept the single most important contribution of his mentor, Alfred Marshall. I mean, that is an incredibly strong statement. So why is it such a big deal?
The truth is, this one simple idea is a powerful tool, and it's used every single day by some of the biggest players in our economy. We're talking about producers setting the prices you pay, governments deciding what to tax, entire nations making trade deals, and even workers fighting for better wages. And you can literally see this playing out everywhere, and it directly hits your wallet. Companies know that if your demand for their product is inelastic, hey, they can jack up the prices without losing too many customers. Governments know they can slap heavy taxes on things like fuel and cigarettes because, yeah, people will complain, but they'll keep buying. On a global scale, you have groups like OPEC who can manipulate oil prices precisely because they know the world's short-term demand is incredibly inelastic. See, this isn't just theory, it's a fundamental lever of economic power. So look, if you take just one thing away from all this, let it be this. Elasticity is not some abstract academic idea. It's the core concept that reveals the hidden power dynamic in every single transaction. It tells you who has the upper hand, you, the consumer, or the product.